Welcome to the Innovation for Startups. And this is a great session, basically focused on the innovation for the startups. And we would now request Sudeendra to welcome the audience here. Over to you, Sudeendra.
Thank you, Munir. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I know that we have a global audience and we certainly have global speakers. I would like to welcome everybody to this very interesting event that we have today on innovation for startups. Just to quickly introduce myself, I am Sudeendra from the IEEE Standards Association. I'm a Senior Director with IEEE and also the Practice Lead for Foundational Technologies Practice within the IEEE Standards Association. Before we get into our main program, I would like to say a couple of words on standards and the IEEE Standards Association. Many of you may have been involved in standards development, but even if you haven't, every person today is perhaps using technologies throughout the day that are built on standards. So we wake up, we look at our phone, we go to bed and we are looking at our phone, and these are all built on standards using technologies that are on standards. So standardization has overall played a very, very important role when it comes to market adoption of technologies, enabling innovation and driving global trade and markets. For example, standards focused around wired and wireless technologies, the communication technologies that were developed through IEEE 802. Perhaps we cannot imagine a world today without IEEE 802.11, which is perhaps more commonly referred to as Wi-Fi. And also IEEE's roots are in some significant standards that were developed in the power and energy sector as our roots. But the technologies are changing very rapidly. There is a lot of emphasis today on newer technologies, cloud and edge computing, data governance, AI and autonomous systems, including focusing on new verticals. Today, IEEE SA is engaged in the pharmaceutical vertical, agricultural vertical, healthcare and life sciences, and there are innovations happening in mobility and other spaces. And in this context, apart from technical standards, I think there are very, very important considerations that we need to take into account that are more around contextual and what we call as impact standards, addressing some of the core issues, and these are not technical requirements, but non-functional requirements, such as ethics, privacy, identity, to ensure that we are building end-to-end trustworthy systems. So recently, in the last few years, within the IEEE SA, we are seeing a significant engagement on standardization from SMEs and startup communities who are driving next-generation innovation globally. And this will continue to grow as innovators are looking at developing solutions in various fields, including AI, machine learning, blockchain, sustainability, to name a few, for some of the very, very complex problems that we are facing today. And I think there is a need for developing some important standards in these areas. In the context of this complex and multidisciplinary technology and a strong growth and influence from SMEs and startups, the role of technology engineering management becomes very important. We are very happy to partner with IEEE Technology and Engineering Management Society, who are collaborating with us in hosting this webinar on innovation for startups. I would also like to note that IEEE TEMS India has also instituted a prestigious award called the Engineering Manager of the Year, which is an annual award. Unfortunately for this year, I think they just closed on the applications, but it's an annual award. So if people are listening to this, please do look for this space next year on. I understand that the nominations just closed. So the Innovation for Startups event is very timely, with Bangalore emerging as one of the top cities in the world for startups and SMEs who are driving these next generation solutions. And we are happy to have NTT Data as our support partner for this event. IEEE SA is also a knowledge partner of NTT Data Open Innovation Context, which is currently taking place. IEEE has had a relationship with NTT for a while. We in fact supported their event in 2019, which was also focused on startups, and we are very thankful for their support, and we hope to continue and build on this collaboration in the future also. I also want to highlight a very important thing today. 14th October every year is celebrated as the World Standards Day. This is set by ITU, by the United Nations, and this year's theme is protecting the planet with standards. How timely, right? So these themes get established 6 to 8 months ahead of time. In fact, I'm just coming out of an event we did jointly with Bureau of Indian Standards, and we do this joint event with them each year in celebration of the World Standards Day. Without further ado, I would like to briefly introduce the two keynote speakers for the day and also the moderator. Their resumes are very impressive, but I would like to highlight some key points. Firstly, I would like to introduce Dr. Chris Fitzgerald, Chief Technical Officer, NTT Data Service. Chris leads the company's global intelligent automation technology strategy and leads client innovation programs. Chris has over 40 years of progressive experience in IT, spanning industries from retail to telecom, digital banking, transfer to commercial and others. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for accepting our invitation to speak at this event. Thank you. Then I have with us Mr. Andy Chen, founding managing partner, REDDS Capital, and President and CEO of Caltronic Enterprise. He is currently serving as the President of the IEEE Technology and Engineering Management Society, and he is also a member of Board of Governors from 2018 to 2020 for IEEE Computer Society. Welcome, Andy, to this event, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Then, after the keynotes, we do have a panel discussion. This panel will be moderated by Dr. Sudeendra Koushik, who has been a very long time IEEE volunteer and also a personal friend of mine. He has held several key positions within IEEE Bangalore section and IEEE TEMS, and he is currently serving as VP IEEE TEMS. Dr. Koushik is a chief innovator and co-founder of Prasu, an innovation consulting company and a TEDx speaker also. He also advises major automotive companies on innovation strategies for business growth. Before I hand it over to Chris, I will be very remiss if I don't thank perhaps the most important people, important team of folks who have made this event happen. I would like to thank who I call as my co-conspirators for this event, Ankur Dasgupta, Ritika Jaria, and Oshwan Panjwani from the NTT team, and also my colleague, Mr. Munir Muhammad, who were instrumental in putting together this program. With that, I would like to hand over this to Chris. I believe Munir will be managing the slideshow and Chris will be speaking. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So appreciate the opportunity to chat with all of you today. You kind of made the comment about, a year ago around this time, I was actually in Bangalore hosting Open Innovation Contest number 10. So this time being virtual, it's a little bit different, Sri, and different aspect to it. So kind of a different point to it. So next page, please. So I want to kind of step back a bit and talk about, before I get to the contest, why innovation, why it's so important today. I would even say it's even more important today in light of what's going on. And we look at it from the two sides. First of all, how does innovation drive and change the organization and its associates and employees? But how also is innovation driving and changing the ecosystem? If you think about it in a time like now, things around how we work remotely, productivity, how we create and survive as a business has been really driven by innovation. Many of our clients have said, what they had planned to do in the next 2 or 3 years, they've done in the last 4 or 5 months. In many cases, they've done that by leveraging the startup communities, the innovation culture to drive very quick growth. But on the ecosystem side, what this also does is it changes the whole ability for jobs. It expands the ability for education and environment sustainability. So innovation is really kind of that engine that helps keep, in effect, all of us going. Next slide, please. When we look at it, some of the things in technology areas that are out there really haven't changed a lot in the last 6 months. Having artificial intelligence is not new, but the use of it has grown exponentially. The use of, for example, intelligent automation to provide flexibility. You think about also edge computing to give work remotely more easy access. And then the whole idea of WebEx, Zoom, or virtual reality has even come more to the forefront. So these technologies haven't changed, but the need to use them in different ways and more innovative ways has increased as we become more and more creative in this kind of disconnected, connected world. Next slide, please. So if we look at things, what's interesting is a lot of our clients have said, hey, with COVID-19, I need to go faster. So people have moved much more on fast ROI-based innovation. And they've kind of moved away from a lot of proof of concepts into, let me go do proof of value quickly. Let me go try something and see if it works. Look at how Zoom has evolved even over the 6-7 months of the pandemic. Also, the whole idea of how do I do things at scale? If you think about moving thousands of people remotely and then having the wide variety of activities, from all of us having challenges getting to the grocery store, to get toilet paper, to get to businesses, we've had to, in effect, flex and scale like never before. And we've had to do new ways of doing business. Many companies who were not very virtual overnight became virtual companies to provide for that distance sale opportunity. So what's really happening is things are moving much, much faster. Innovation becomes much, much more important. Next slide, please. So when we talk about innovation, it's a bit of who we are as a company. And I appreciate Shree's comments about NTT data. NTT Group spends about $3.6 billion annually in the R&D innovation space with thousands of researchers, patents, everything from quantum computing to 5G to AI. But a lot of it is to drive a continual process of driving change in the business. Okay, we do this also through things around our key commitments to things like, safe, agile, and to, open source and pieces like that to drive innovation with our partners. And then use the scale for that, and then really drive it through our clients. So innovation for us is not just the R&D, but how we innovate and co-innovate with our customers to drive change. Next slide, please. So we kind of think of this in a couple broad areas. Let me just share a couple of those. So starting from the right, we start kind of with foresight. What do we see happening in the next 3 to 10 years? First of all, from the social standpoint, and then also from the technology, whether it's now the idea of AI transparency, visibility, to the idea of really getting away from a flat screen to a more immersive experience with 8K, the whole 5G piece. How are we driving those changes? We do that also then by having events, spot events like hackathons. We'll do these internally. We'll do them in partnership with universities and students, or globally around a challenge that says, how can I look at, for example, geospatial data to understand the impact of COVID on transportation technologies? And then last but not the least is we also do things like our Open Innovation Contest. This is a point we do every year, which is taking our clients' challenges and finding ways to, in fact, partner our clients with the startup communities to drive sustainable innovation. So next page, please. I'd like to kind of move from the general to the actual contest, if I may. Next page, please. So the Open Innovation Contest is an annual event. As I mentioned before, up until this year, it was a physical event. We hosted them, for example, in Bengaluru, in Silicon Valley, Boston, in Vancouver, all over the world. But this year, it's all going to be virtual. Now, we think that's an opportunity even for more activity by the startup community, because you don't have to try and say, can I fly to a city and have the event on a date, but in fact, do it virtually. The real key is the event, it takes a combination of, first of all, what are the challenges that our clients are having? So we start with their challenges, okay? We then look at, hey, as innovative startup companies, you can compete and try for those challenges. The great value is that the three of us, the client, ourselves, and you, can co-create and co-innovate to drive solutions. And that's what the commitment is there for, to have that partnership there. And it's not just the winners of the competition, but in many cases, many of the finalists end up doing business issues with our clients. Next page, please. So I posted a few of these up here on the right-hand side, but these are the challenges, and they're out there on our website, which is Open Innovation Contest. We'll put a link into the presentation at the end, but if you just search NTT Data, Open Innovation, you'll find the contest link. You'll find the flags, so you can click the India flag, the Canadian flag, the U.S. flag, and get to various sites. And you'll find the challenges that our clients have posted. So, for example, we see things around healthcare. These have been posted by some of our healthcare clients. So as we post towards those, you've already got that link between, for example, a Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare or a Blue Cross Blue Shield company with those opportunities. You also find that there are people on there to help you out with the process. So, in fact, we try and make sure it's easy to apply and work through it. A key part of how we look at the contest also is how do these challenges and companies also address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? How are you addressing healthcare for all, clean air and water, food and sustenance? So it's very designed to try and also help society drive innovation, a key factor. Lastly, I want to highlight the fact that we said before, it's not just the winners, but the next page, if you would please, we'll talk about how one of the winners is now, in effect, we are going to market with this. So it's not, in this case, not just a partner with one of our clients, but actually NTT Data has now gone to market with this partner as a key part of our solution around the world. So it's really the key for us is that this is an opportunity to, in effect, bring your ideas, bring your products and solutions, and partner with us and our clients to drive sustainable innovation. Next page, please. So I want to kind of remind you, here's the site, openinnovation.nttdata.com/en contest. Okay, or just search for it. If you have any questions, you will find a contact name and email on the site to send questions to. Or you can also send any questions to officeofthecto@nttdata.com. And with that, I'll turn back to Sri.
Thank you. I should remember to unmute before I start talking.
We all have that challenge in this virtual world, Sri.
If only I can communicate, right, through my brain that I am talking and it unmutes itself. But at the same time, I don't want these technologies doing things without my permission. So we are definitely headed that way. Thank you very much, Chris. That was excellent discussion on innovation. I think this segues very well into what Andy will be sharing from the technology engineering management perspective. Over to you, Andy. And before Andy starts, I would like to remind the audience put their questions on the chat window, and Munir and I are looking at these questions, and we will send it to Sudeendra Koushik during the panel also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sri. I just want to make sure that my audio is clear and my visual is clear. Sri, could you confirm that?
Absolutely. Perfect.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Sri's maneuver to put this together. And what a fascinating talk Chris just gave. Let me change it a little bit the other way. I come from, as Sri kind of briefly introduced my background. So currently I'm very much involved with the IEEE, being the, just want to make sure, is the screen clear? Is there anything blocking the screen? Or
Totally clear.
Okay, perfect. All right. I am currently the president of TEMS, and I've been on the board governor for Capital Societies. Recently, I was appointed to the VP of Conference for System Council. So I've been very active in IEEE, working with all different sectors, and very exciting. I'm also a venture capitalist. Me and my partners, we have a tech fund that invests the disruptive technologies. Because of that, I gain a lot of insight into how does the startup sectors work, and how we look for different unicorns or disruptive startup to invest on. I was the CTO for the largest utility company in Canada. We have power generation ranging from nuclear power, fossil to hydropowers, and I was with the company for 30 years. So I had a lot of deep technologies and a lot of security issues and other experiences that I could share. I'm also on a consulting company, a global consulting company on power generations. I consult with government of China, Australia, Europe, France, and several other countries. I'm also on the board, advisory board for several United Nations agencies, ITU, Data Pulse, WHOs, and others. TEMS is all about people. We focus on the engineers and technologies, part of the people side of the management. In past few years, we started a lot of focus on entrepreneurship, focus on the younger generations. We also been known for our innovation research, and one of our main focus is trying to promote engineering technologies, technicians and technical people to the leadership positions. A little bit of history is about TEMS. We are probably one of the oldest societies in IEEE. Started in 1951. Next year it will be our 70th anniversary. At one point, we have about 9,000 members globally. In 2007, we decided to, my predecessor decided to form a council that cut across all the society, representing the different part of technologies. But we kind of lose touch with the member directly. In 2015, it was decided that we're going back to Technology Engineering Management Society form, and that's what you know now today as TEMS. We are one of the oldest publishing society for industrial publications. Our society has a very heavy weight on the industry as much as academia. We have about 3,000 plus members across the globe, 61 chapters, 15 joint chapters, and 20 student chapters, branches, and they are growing very rapidly this year because of a lot of, we've been doing a lot of promotions, reaching out to people, getting people involved in this. And this seminar, this webinar is one of the examples. Our focus area really is to move, to help people move the idea from idea to market. So when you get a bright idea, when you get some kind of innovations, you like to figure out how to marketing it to become the services. That is one of the areas that we focus on. We identify and implement successful projects and systems for the large enterprise, medium and large enterprises. We also have done research in the area, including how to integrate technologies for capability and productivity. And more important things, we help and mentor our members to go from an engineer to a leaders. A large part of our involvement circle around balancing the norms of society, government, and regulators. Now, today, I think I'm going to focus on this idea to the market. For those of you, this is a graph of my predecessors taking a technical concept into actual product and services. There are many components in it, depending on type of business you're in. You're in brick and mortars, or you are a software company, or you're a high-tech company. Today, I like to focus on one thing and not two things. One thing is how to build a successful startup, and two is how do you get money, the finance part. So that is pretty much more of my my experience lies in the finance aspect of it for enterprise entrepreneurs. For those of you that's in the startup sectors, you probably will come across this well-known book by Stephen Banks. It's called Startup Owner's Manual. It's a great book to read if you are thinking about building your own company and starting up your own startup. It lays out the two phases. The phases one is you got to set up logistics for your team. To manage your team, you got 2 or 3 people helping you think about idea, getting them involved. Then you need to craft your company hypothesis. What is the company about? And more importantly, you got to start thinking about what the value propositions that people can say, that's what I need. And if you want to, right after that, you got to start to get the web presence. So you got to set up your website logistics, but you want to build a very low fidelity website, a simple website with just the message you want to get through, what the company is going to offer, and trying to get customers to come to the website to participate. That is kind of the phase one for those who are just starting from scratch. On the phase two, you got to start putting things behind the back end code to make the site work. And you need to get what you receive from the customers, from the visitors, the data they give you, the problem they're experiencing, and think their feedback. And then you test out solutions, and then you build a much higher fidelity website with more functional part. And the last thing you do is you start asking for money, meaning that you start asking people to pay for your services. At that point, you're going to start thinking about expanding. So then you start needing about, where do I get the money to start? So according to Bank of Canada Development Centers, there are 7 sources, and there are probably more, but 7 major sources where you would get some money and fundings, right? One is personal investment. So if you look at usually that's how everybody started. You've got some saving, and then you put it in, and you started to building your company, your ideas. The second we call the love money. Your uncle, your parents, your friends, the people that would trust in your ability. We always warn people about the love money. It's something that two-edged sword. You could end up easily losing a good friend and others. So be very careful when you start getting into the kind of borrowing from the relatives and others. Venture capital, venture equity it's something that in a huge industries and it's growing around the globe. And that's where I'm going to focus a bit more today. The number 4 is the angel funds, right? You put a teaser together, and then you show it to where the angels are the people with deep pocket that would be willing to invest on you, and it's pretty much one-to-one approach. There's many what they call business incubators or innovation centers that's around the world, including many government, university. That's where you could actually get some help. In many cases, they will also have way to help you with the fundings. And usually it's come from the next part, government grants and subsidies. So many incubator centers associate that and help you with getting a government grant or getting a subsidy to implement your ideas. And lastly, once your company getting more reliable or more stable, you have some assets that you can then start asking for a bank loan. Okay, let me just. So, in the venture capital world, once you get to the point where you started to ask for money, that's what we call the C stage. At this stage, you pretty much have a concept. You pretty much know what you want to go after for the customers, but you don't really have any working models or anything really solid that you can start doing the offering for services. Then you come to a startup stage. Startup stage is when you now have a business plan, you have a business model, and you usually have a prototype that people can start using and people can start providing feedback. The first stage is also called first or second stage in the capital. We sometimes refer to it as emerging stage or mezzanine. That's where you are going to start getting more of people that with a serious venture capital looking into investing on your series, and many venture capitals are investing in early stage, such as ours. Usually, these companies are a little bit more risky, but they usually come with a lot more reward. Once you pass that, you'll be going to the expansion stage, which is second or the third stage, where you literally has a company that's running now well, and you start showing the profit. Then your company start self-sustained, cash flow started to stabilize, you have more cash in, then you have expenses out. And the last stage for venture capital, most of us, is what we call the bridge stage. That's when they actually go up to the mezzanine and they are getting into the pre-IPO stage. And that's usually when they end up with, in many companies, they end up with IPO, initial product offering, or they become merged into by a large corporation. So there are different venture capital who would help the startup to do either IPO or to matching up with the bigger corporations. So that's usually how the venture capital works. Well, I just wanted to highlight a little bit about IPOs. The money part is IPO, there is an ICO. For those of you who have probably heard of ICOs called initial coin offering, you may ask, what is the difference? Okay, so IPO is using money and the shares. Like you get a share from the company, and transactions are more like the stock market that other people are familiar with. You get a share of the company. Whereas ICO is using coin meaning cryptocurrencies. They raise cryptocurrencies, and the targets are very different, and the maturity and process are different. ICO usually you can hit a pretty big ICO. You can raise up to millions and even billions of dollars, but it is a crowdsourcing type of you establish, and then you get almost anybody can invest on that with a cryptocurrency. Whereas IPO, it's only very curated investors that would get involved. One of the things you're going to come to as a startup on the funding part to get reaching out to the venture capital will be on this startup competition, things what Chris is mentioned to earlier. You will find a lot of pitching contests where you would enter, and you need to start preparing a deck for your company, what kind of pitch deck that you want to do. And in IEEE TEMS, our conferences, we have a component on the pitching contest. So we would work with the incubation centers and others to promote their pitching contest. Last year's TEMSCon 2019 in Atlanta, we have pitching contest, and we award winner to winners. The other one to look at much global scales, IEEE has IEEE entrepreneurship. IEEE entrepreneurship is one that really, I think for those of you that haven't exposed to it, you should looking into it. IEEE TEMS work closely with IEEE entrepreneurship. Last year I was invited to IEEE, the largest pitch competition in Singapore with Singapore government. It's called Switch 2019, and 20 is coming up in December. There are about 1,000 companies participating in different categories, and IEEE actually involved in picking up the winners and one of the sponsors. The winner of the contest literally walk away with almost $500,000 of the prize for grant for their startup. So there is a lot of opportunities, but you need to be able to prepare a pitch deck and some kind of video to persuade people what your idea and enter the competitions. Just wanted to share with you, I am also the judges for United Nations AI for Good and Telecoms pitching contest. And I just want to share with you some of the things they're looking for that we judge on for those startup competitions. Now, different pitching contests would have a different criteria. This is more in line with the sustainable goal that Chris was talking about earlier. So we judge on the ideas. Is it innovative? It is something increment offering a greater values, and the business model, is it scalable? Can it really deploy worldwide? And how do you use technologies? How do you utilizing the technology that offer you in the AI, blockchains, and all the high tech? And the impact to society, that's a huge one for the valuations for the startup in the United Nations stage. Scalability, many companies do well, but once they start scaling up, it becomes a huge problem to the point some company actually busted because they just cannot sustain the expansion. And one of the things we're looking for is the presentations and their ability to convey. To being a startup, you have to be able to sell your ideas. You have to convince many people to go with the idea, to purchase your services, and that skill is very important if you want to be successful. And last but not the least, we look at the team. The team of people, do they have the depth? Do they have the coverage for the finance? Do they have coverage for the legal aspect of it? Do they have coverages for technologies? So that is how we do the judges. I just want to bring back to IEEE TEMS. I think it is a great community that we built. Will help you if you're working for a large company, your essential management and leadership knowledge is among IEEE members. And we help a member maintain their management skills. And we definitely have many opportunity for older member or more senior member to mentor, to help the younger member with their career path development. And we really have one big focus on how to transfer from academia researchers to industry. So transfer the knowledge between academia and practitioners communities. So we cover many areas. We cover field of interest, and I'm not going to go too deep in there. But one of the things that we focus on, place more focus on education and training, transitions to management. And we have two project management, program management. So our member has many technical activity area. Our conferences are global conferences. Actually, Sudeendra is our VP of conference, and we have the strategies of offering a global summit to bring all the TEMS partners, members together, as well as we partner with research firm, research academia on the conferences, as well as partner with industries. We also have a one-day industry forum, and our technical areas has global AI standards, technology for social good, equity, minority in tech, design engineering process, and a couple more technical activity we're adding on entrepreneurship and student activities. And we have the publication, so I'm just concluding my talk. It is I encourage you to look up the TEMS, looking into what we do. We have a lot of young professionals and students involved, and it's very exciting. Our virtual events, we offer these, like these events that we participate in, local events and global events. We also have the webinar every other Thursday to bring our speakers more like a distinguished lectures. We also have Stephen Ibaraki, who is Microsoft MVP for the 19th year, and this year he is Microsoft AI Most Valuable Professional. He does conduct interview with the world leaders and share that with our members. So if you go on social media, you can find us on Facebook, you can Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So come out and reach us. And that's it, my talk. I'm going to turn back to Sri.
Thank you very much, Andy. I appreciate that. Now we will go into the panel session. I would at this point call upon Dr. Koushik to run the panel.
Sure, Sri, thank you. Fantastic talk by Chris and Andy. I think it covers two important angles, the technical angle and the funding angle. I already see some pretty relevant questions, but maybe to set the context a little bit, we talked about, and I think somebody's mic is not muted. Okay, thank you. So we looked at a scenario here where, like Chris said, things are changing. I think many of you might have heard the concept of the rate of change, which Jack Welch talked about. When the rate of change outside is more than the rate of change inside, there is a problem. There is something that's going to happen sooner than later. And this inside can be a company, a person, a startup, etc. So during this course, there are several things that are coming out. And one of them is, of course, entrepreneurship, which has been around, but startups have become more and more stronger. And like Andy covered, there are a lot of investments and activities going around the world around this. But there's also something else happening. On one end of the spectrum, we have an employee with a secure employment. The other end of the spectrum is entrepreneurship. There is in between that is coming up as intrapreneurship, which many companies are strongly trying to latch upon and build upon that community as well. The essence is how much risk you want to take, right? So in this spectrum, there is a lot of opportunities that is coming, both in terms of entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. I think I always say that it doesn't have to be that everybody has to be an entrepreneur. I mean, theoretically speaking, if everybody is an entrepreneur, there is nobody available to work for them, right? So it's always whom you take into account, and you don't have to become an entrepreneur if you're not cut out for it. Everybody has a role to play. And I think that's where today we're going to spend a little bit of time. And I would like to start with this question to Chris, that how does a day of innovation or an innovator look like in NTT in terms of, so there's so much of innovation within NTT. Chris, you mentioned about 16,000 plus patents and, close to $3.6 billion in R&D. That's a huge amount of money by any standards. And being in the top 100 global innovators, it's a feather in the hat for any company. And as an innovator, it really excites me. How would you express this innovation within NTT, Chris?
That's a great question, and it kind of spans a lot of areas. Because you mentioned there are several areas of it. I would maybe put it, first of all, into two buckets. I'd say one bucket is deterministic innovation. So with a set of technology foundations, so for example, we know that quantum is going to have an impact in our future, whether it's the ability to do real-time routing of bread delivery or, cyber encryption type things. So there'll be innovation that is very deterministic. Here's the path to it. It is funded. It is planned for. I'd say the second half is more opportunistic innovation. It's in effect, I may not know the answer yet, but I've got a series of problems. Okay. The problems might be internal for optimization or serving a client need, or external where our clients are saying, how do they get more competitive? How are they driving, in effect, this more virtual world that, in fact, enables more competition? And so there's always that constant piece of how do you encourage, as you said, the inside part of it while you still do your day job. And so for us, it's kind of the opportunistic side is through the combination of contest and chat areas and always challenging our teams, bring the ideas forward. We have a permanent idea portal that we're bring the ideas up here. We recognize them, we acknowledge them, and those get filtered through. How can we drive those? And it's a constant balance of that. But it's an interesting piece because if you're not innovating and asking that question, then you're going to get complacent, and I would say you're going to become irrelevant.
Excellent. I think that's really the crux of what I was trying to share with the audience here, because one of the questions that often comes up is, why do startups fail? And a major company that studied Bangalore as a startup center 1.5 years ago came up with a very startling stat that 95% of the startups fail, example in Bangalore alone. And number one reason for those 95% to fail is because they build products which nobody wants. I think that sort of summarizes why. And they're working with them. I have seen them. They're very smart people. They would have worked for companies like NTT, Intel, Motorola, very big companies, very accomplished people. But biggest mistake is, like you said, Chris, not asking the right question, which leads you to the right answer. I think G.K. Chesterton said the same thing, that it's not that we don't know the solution. I think we don't know the problem for which we are trying to find a solution. And one of the audience has asked this question, what is the situation for startups in Bangalore, and most important valuable qualities required for starting your startup? I think before I ask this question to Chris and Andy, from my observation, there are misplaced constructs for success of a startup. Some startups feel that if they're newspaper, they're successful. Some startups believe that they're funded, they're successful. And I think these are all just milestones in the road to being successful. So what would you call, Andy, first on this? What would be a success for a startup?
Thanks, Sudeendra. Let me just spin it a little bit with you, with the question you asked. One of the things that we look for, and I think that's something that everybody need to really be considering about. When you talked about 95% of startup fail, that is very true. And the fact that they build something that nobody needs, that's very true. But by and large, there's the other side of the spectrum where they build something that everybody wants. Unfortunately, many people are building them. So the first thing that we do in the venture capital world is look at what is your competitors. The other one is going to make you irrelevant. So if you look at some of the business model that you're doing, the first thing we look is that how does that model get disrupted? If somebody changed the playing field, you're no longer valid. Like the examples of a GE that's been around for years and years and years. But when the new technology, innovation, digital twins comes in, it really hammered them hard. Their innovation wasn't just kept up. But if you think about it, when we actually evaluating any deal, the first thing we ask them is who's your competitors and how are you different from that? And that is a very important thing because we all know what people want and we all want to build something, but how do you build something innovative enough that can disrupt everybody else? So to be successful, I think you need to know who your competitors are.
I really like that, Andy, because many times when we work with startups being part of different incubators across the globe, they live in their own world. They have no clue whom they're competing with. I think that's already setting up themselves for failure indeed. Chris, before you answer that question, maybe I'll rephrase that question a little bit. One of the experiences that I have in marrying startups and bigger companies like NTT is that what the startup has is not ready-made for what NTT wants. And what NTT is looking for is not readily available in the market, but there could be some metamorphosis of what is available with the startups. So would that be an opportunity for startups to engage with bigger companies, Chris?
Yeah, it is, and I want to go back. So it's the key thing for us is the word alignment, okay? And it's alignment to the problem, as we said earlier, is if you look at the problem we're trying to solve. So it doesn't mean that the solution has to be perfectly aligned, as you said. We may be able to tilt it 45 degrees and say, hey, that's exactly how we can take advantage of that. And my clients have the same perspective, but there does have to be that problem we're solving for is real to the company. or to our clients. And so to me, that is the first thing we look for is what you're trying to do aligned with what we're trying to solve. Not necessarily how we're trying to solve it, but the outcome we're trying to go to, I think, is key. The second piece of it is your ability to understand what is your product. Are you software? Are you service? Are you hardware? Often you get someone with an answer that has the pieces of all three, and we say, so what is your real thing? Yes. No. Because that becomes the challenge of is that gives a sense for, are you a manufacturing prowess because it's a product? Or is it really that what my issue is this software, but I need a services partner? So also the last piece is what kind of partnership makes sense for you? Okay. How do you put 1 and 1 together and get 4 and not get 2?
I think that's how open innovation can succeed. And the contest that you have put up from NTT is an excellent example of how the tuning of the solution really make that tick, as you said. And that reminded me, Chris, when we sit in juries, like Andy was talking about, we hear when we ask the question to the startup team, who is your customer? They said everybody is a customer. So I think that's where we start to go wrong from the word go. Having said that, are there different sectors, and this is a question to both Chris and Andy, are there different sectors, maybe Andy first, in terms of deep tech, for example, Chris talked about quantum computing, AI, you talked about AI. So are there different opportunities that are emerging specifically around due to COVID?
I'll start that. I think what you're seeing around that is more of acceleration of maybe some of them. So there were some technologies out there, for example, around smart cities. And they were designed around things like how do I look at cars going the wrong direction or looking at traffic patterns and changing things. But inherent in that were also cameras and AI to help stuff. Now take return to location, which is how do I make my work environment safe through thermal cameras to take your temperature? Are you wearing the mask? Are you maintaining distancing? So you're seeing, in effect, some technologies being tilted to help. In fact, COVID has driven some different conversations around how do I make location safe in a different way than it was before. So that's an example of one that COVID has turned areas from different places into a new solution.
Just to continue your point, Chris, what is your take on 5G, for example?
Well, 5G to me is exciting because I believe it compute to the edge and provide more of that information everywhere. As you get more and more IoT out there like this information, 5G is part of that enabler. So it's a key part of driving that change to it, but it's also part of changing the virtual experience. I mean, we're doing things with 5G, 8K live transmissions, 8K, not 4K, not 5K, 8K. You can't even tell it's not reality. And that ability to have that means that the environment can now be much more live to you at home or somewhere than it was before. And 5G is enabling that because of what it enables as far as the bandwidth.
Excellent. I think, Andy, the similar question applies to quantum computing, right? In terms of deep tech and where we are heading.
Yeah, so actually, that's a pretty interesting question. The timing, too. This week, it happened to be IEEE Quantum Engineering Week. It is supposed to happen in Colorado, but it's actually gone virtual. It brought together all the quantum computing vendors, startup, researchers. So it's been a very exciting week exploring that. Then TEMS, we actually put together a workshop, entrepreneur workshop with IEEE entrepreneurships. The first part was to look at the quantum computing startup from the academia sectors. The researchers that is researching because quantum computing is really in the infant stage if you compare to what the other matures, but it has to come because of the Moore's law pretty much hitting the bottom, right? If there is no more expansion, the speed that we had experienced, it has to be a different platform. So taking from binary to the multi-stage, it's just really something that needs to happen, and it's been around. So what I think having that as a potential and many of the companies are putting huge investment into it. Now, the quantum computing no longer a very expensive way to get in. There's a lot of offerings in the cloud. You can actually do quantum computing programming, take a course, how to program computing, and I think that's probably where you need to start, is to appreciate what that is. Now, one of the things that we very interesting is that in IEEE entrepreneurship, we're matching mentor to the startup. So if you go there, you say, well, I have a startup, I'm looking for somebody to mentor. You put it in, you'll get somebody pair up with you. So I pair up with a couple of startups that in the energy sectors, they're thinking about expanding the energies. But what it is that it be able to help mentor the startup and to get them into the right direction, a better business model, a better idea, or better network, and that really is going to help that. The interesting point is that we in TEMS, one of our member from Uruguay, he was one that approached us to do these, and his quantum computing startup, it actually got picked as a top 5 for the competitions, and it's really exciting for Quantum Week. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is you need to know the tools. All the tools available to you, as I mentioned before, we partner with Amazon for Amazon Web Services and others. So all the big players are there. But again, this is an opportunity, and it really takes individual with your innovation idea that to look for the opportunity, how you want to get involved. You need to learn about quantum computing if you want to be part of quantum computing community. So for me, the other one would be the AI. Artificial intelligence, that is really mostly accessible now, and many people can get into machine learning, deep learning quickly and taking different courses, like some of the programming offering in Princeton, that they're free for Python courses, and they're one of the best courses you can take. So it yourself have to be familiar with the technology that you are going to manage. So for me, that is the practical part you need to apply to it.
Yeah, I think it's the way I would summarize that is, Andy, for explaining what you said. I think technology is good, but application of technology is more important in the startup world. And I think, like both of you said, in the end, in the business context, innovation has to generate value, and through that revenue for the stakeholders, if not the shareholders only. And that could be in multiple ways. So I think there is a question also around this. What are the qualities required for starting your startup? I think both Chris and Andy mentioned value as the key. And because value is what you pay for. You don't buy a toothpaste because somebody buys it. You buy a toothpaste because it's valuable to you. And you buy a particular toothpaste because you find that that's the most valuable toothpaste for you. And I think when the money comes out of the pocket, you are, as a customer, looking out for value. With that background, is there a shift in what kind of startups are taking precedence? For example, due to COVID, is there an AI? For example, in Bangalore, I myself had an experience. There is a kind of a lab, a pathology lab. It does the scanning and X-ray and everything. And the gentleman who runs is a doctor, medical doctor. He is the vice chancellor of a university. He made an AI-based detection of infection in the lungs due to COVID, where the test might not give you the accurate result. So they would actually go down, which you cannot visually see in a scan, but they did some methods and developed it to detect. So with this, is there a skew that more investments are going towards pharma and related, Andy?
Yeah, I think what COVID has brought is it brought a different set of requirement, different set of things that we didn't used to need. The social distancing part, the barrier part, protecting yourself. And I think that is become, in the COVID world, it's become a huge driver for the need. And that's where people are looking into how do you provide a solution to the problem they have, right? I mean, if you think about it, a simple things, every restaurant want to open up, they want to figure out how to protect their customers, and they were talking about maybe they have to install plexiglasses to protect. Just like even in the U.S. debate, they talk about we're going to build a plexiglass between the two leaders so they don't get contaminated or they don't pass. So there's a lot of talk about plexiglasses. How do you install it? How do you get the better quality plexiglass? The whole industry spins off. But the real disruptor isn't really, people is looking for the best plexiglass. People are looking for the best solution to protect yourself. So the disruptor is going to come in when somebody comes with the idea, can do it with some kind of shield without a light or others, without having plexiglass. Next thing you know, all the plexiglass startup are gone, right? Because they are irrelevant. They've been disrupted. So for me, you need to focus on, again, what's the disrupting and what's the competitors, and how do you solve those problems?
Yeah, I think it's a very excellent point, Andy. I think in my words, I would summarize it as saying the innovation that you come up with should not necessarily be new, but it should be useful, and I think people should be willing to pay for it. Chris, the next one for you, there's a question around what we wanted to discuss also is due to the pandemic, for the startup, the impact on success of startups, is it going to be a boom or a bane?
I think it's there's a bit of a boom side in that in this time when you need a more innovative culture, it's a boom for it. The virtual aspect of it means that all of a sudden you don't have, you're less restricted to boundaries, because we're more around cities, that's less centric. The negative side of it is that there's also a cleaner focus on investment dollars. There's less disposable dollars for companies to do something with. So I think they're going to be more focused on where they spend it, because in fact it's going to be, some cases are companies who are trying to survive. You think of hospitality, transportation, airlines, they're trying to get through this. But then you've got things like the healthcare side you mentioned earlier. Healthcare is exploding with ideas, because the whole idea of virtual medicine, remote care, which are not actually new, but have all of a sudden become the norm, I think will explode, and how you drive that. So it is, if you're in the right spaces, it's going to be the boom. I think if you're in some of those areas, if you're trying to figure out the next best way to fly, probably isn't the space I spend major investment money in right now.
Absolutely. From an NTT Open Innovation Contest that you have shared with us today, what are the possible application areas, like different kind of, like you mentioned, healthcare? Can you share a few areas where this could be useful?
Yeah, so it's a great cut. So healthcare, one of ours is really, I think, one of the key pieces. And if you think about it, and it goes back to Andy's comment around AI, one of them is how do we use intelligence to either predict something more effectively? Can I predict based on information I'm seeing that there is a disease pattern coming or a chronic disease effect? Or can I intervene in the standpoint of how do I avoid expensive treatment? So I think there's a lot of things around innovation in AI in that space. Supply chain is a key thing. Our whole supply chains have been radically disruptive. How do I relook at my supply chain and have that in a different way? Because it's no longer just in time, but what's the right tensions for that are part of the challenges to it. I think the last one I'd also is there's the whole area of the digitization, so that remote care, okay, the whole idea of digital identity. You think about it in many places, who owns the healthcare data? How do I make the experience different? We all laugh about a consumer or, experience in retail, but how many of us get a consumer experience in healthcare? You typically go somewhere, you wait, the queuing is not great. And so I think that whole idea of, and that's again, not a new concept, but very, very relevant now in that digital world of COVID. Because all those are areas that our clients are saying, we have plans, but would like to understand there's maybe a different way. And back to Andy's point, if you're not disrupting your thinking, someone else is, and they'll come in and change your business for you. So this is a chance for our clients to have that disruptive thought inside of the loop versus outside of the loop.
Fantastic. So I think there is also a question around, will there be impact or opportunities in the automotive sector? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the whole idea of the self-driving, that part is going to be, I think, even more accelerated. Automotive is interesting because I don't think cars are going to go away. We've seen kind of at least in the U.S., as things have opened back up, you've seen people get back out, but people also want to go somewhere. Even if you're doing that remote work, people do want to get out and expand. So I think you may see a tilt from that commute aspect to more of that personal engagement aspect. And so I think you're going to see a different aspect to it. But, from what we're watching our customers in the automotive sector, they saw a big dip in kind of the middle, but they're seeing that kind of come back up again. But even also towards more of the electric cars and other things. You're seeing a shift towards technology driving that and the experience being part of it also.
Yeah, I agree that because I also work in this area a little bit more, and I shared the thought because today, while before COVID, there was a huge move towards, shared mobility. I think now this is the antithesis of shared mobility, right? You want from one away from each other.
Unless you got a plastic shield between your front seat and your back seat.
Yeah,
with your own filtration. Yeah, and a HEPA filter in your back seat. It's a little bit of a challenge for you. Yeah.
And like Andy said, if I have to think disruptively, I might have to think of seats which cannot hold the coronavirus for longer than a second or something like that. Also, after steering, which is a very different material. Andy, your take? Automotive?
Yeah, actually, what I'm thinking, and this is something I've been trying to preach about it for a long time, and I think the business model of the transportation is going to be completely disrupted, and we can see how that with the communications with the cell phones. And most of us, when we actually own a cell phone, when we want to get the data, we buy a plan. We buy a plan saying, I only need this month, I only want to talk 180 minutes, or I want to use 6 gigabytes. Eventually, what's going to happen, I think, that's just my thinking, and it's inevitably, people is going to say, I only want to travel 300 miles this month. And I'd like to pay that 300 miles to somebody, and the car is going to show up, and I'm going to get in there, and then I use up 20 miles. And then, what happened is that you do not have an ownership anymore. So if you don't have an ownership, what's going to happen is you don't have cost of insurance. You don't have a cost of anything. It's about the whole thing as a services, right? So what's going to be disrupted in the future is insurance company is going to be really struggle because if that shift. Now, all the dealerships going to be struggle because really you can just deal directly with the manufacturer saying, I want to, and if they build all the autonomous driving car, they plan it, they get rid of your parking problem, they get rid of a lot of stuff that you have in the society, smart cities. So I can see that happen. How fast it's going to happen, I don't know. But I can see the end state being in a subscription base of the transportations rather than ownership. And that's what was disrupted by the Uber. But this is not disrupt Uber completely. Yeah. Because it's going to come straight from there. So that is my thought for a long time, and I'm just seeing when it's going to happen.
Well, it's interesting, Andy. You could add that to the checklist society. I think in large concentrated cities, I don't disagree with you. We can't forget the large parts of areas that aren't that concentrated. And then there's that desire to own. So you take a New York City, you're totally correct. You take a Texas, totally opposite side of the spectrum. We're going to keep having our pickup trucks, because people want to get out there on their own. So I think it'd be interesting to watch that split between the population density, where I think you have that piece to it. And I do agree, Uber and your Airbnbs are going to be interesting victims or participants in this change.
Yeah, I think that's something. If you look at a densely populated city, for example, in India, where IT parks are more like in Bangalore, there are figures floating around where 80 to 85% of the cars are sitting idle in the big part of the day. So I think that goes back to both of your points that what are we trying to do the utilization of these resources which are just idling away. It's not just the cars. In a country like India, there are also drivers who are sitting idle and doing nothing. So I think if companies cannot change or adapt, I think there are many studies which also say, like the startups, 2 out of 3 companies would disappear without innovation. So there is one question around that to you, Chris, which coincidentally we talked about is with work from home being the new norm, how does companies like NTT cope with big workspaces, office spaces? And I'm adding corollary to that. Is there an opportunity for startups?
It's a great question because, we are rethinking the work environment, based on what we've seen. But it is kind of a balance. And we were talking about this, I think, Andy, before the session started, is, the balance is we're not going to see, I think, this main rush back to all the buildings, but more of a flexible, which means that, in fact, you're going to have people who are going to go in on a basis for social interaction. But I think a chunk of work will stay remote. As part of that, we're now providing, work from home, technology, internet, and chairs to make that environment. But it's also going to be the team members are going to somewhat self-select. To me, the companies that succeed will not make the edict on it, but will engage their associates into what's the best for them. And so I think you'll see a balance of folks that will like to go back to the locations, but I think you're going to see a repurposing of, we may not actually vacate any space, but you may social distance the space. And so, in fact, you may have half the people working there that did before and need the same amount of space based on keeping a safe space for a while. But I think it's going to be more of a hybrid blend versus a very hard cut off or on going forward.
Excellent. I think
just a quick interrupt.
Yeah, sure. So there is a convergence of. Yeah, got it, Sri. Yeah. So I think the last few questions are converging around that topic, Chris, mainly for you. So I just grouped them. So it's all about the Open Innovation Contest. What is the last date? Can we apply as an individual or should it be a team? These are the basic 3 questions that have come up.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, the last date of post is October 31st. Halloween is the last date of post. The answer is, as far as individual or company, we are, unlike Andy, maybe who's helping the startup who's looking for money, we're not looking for the company that's looking for money. Okay, looking for the company that's ready with their product, that's looking, how do I connect with businesses? How do I get clients? I've got my I've got my proof of concepts. I've done my pieces. I'm now ready to look at that. How do I scale? Okay, so it's really that company, that they may be only 1 or 2 years in, but it's not the one who's still working on the product. We don't need them to be mature. They'll need to be 5 years down, but they need to have the product so they can demonstrate and say, this is what we have, and we can see viability to that organization through the funding they have and the products they have. And along with that, I would say not just viability, but that they have the ability to scale if we can add that for them. So that's kind of the point to it. So in general, probably individuals are no, because you're not, what is that piece? Individuals more of a myself, but it doesn't have to be a, large organization. But we're not looking to provide funding. We're looking to provide that access to clients and scale and opportunities for you to grow your company, in this Open Innovation Contest.
Okay, I hope that answers all the questions. Any final remarks, Andy, Chris, before we hand over to Sri?
Chris, you go ahead.
So I want to say, first of all, thank you for hosting the session. Great having Andy with us here to talk about it. I always find that the best sessions are where I learn by the other panelists and the questions being asked. And so I always find it interesting. I worked for an entrepreneurial company a long time ago, and I would close by, I think everyone at some point in their career needs to work in a startup. Okay? Because if nothing else, it changes your orientation of what it means to survive. When it's your dollar, your lunches are very different as a company lunch versus when it's your lunch. At the same time, it's a bit of having both perspectives. Don't just be a startup. Spend some time in the corporate world, because it gives you a perspective of how they find value in work. And that combination, I think, brings the best value, because you can understand and relate, but drive the passion of innovation.
Yeah, fantastic. I fully agree, because when I did my startup, I left my job as VP, and everybody was just poking fun that I was the most idiotic person they could ever find on earth. I was 43, and then I had to find a laptop the next day because I didn't have a laptop. And all throughout my career, it was just a given, like my arm and leg, and I had to buy one. So it was a very difficult and very, very different experience, like you said. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just wanted closing by, there's one area we haven't touched at all, and I really wanted to leave that with the audience to really think about. In the beginning, when I talked about some of the area that we focus on, I think one area that I think I like more, especially with this young crowd, is the educations. the education being disrupted totally, where people are trying to figure out how to educate their young kids. And there is a great opportunity for many people to provide effective educations, go from K-1, K-12 to universities. And that is one area that I think, in addition to healthcare, especially with academia, we need some solutions. And we're looking for a lot of education partners, especially in the venture capital world. We're looking for things like that. So I believe that is an opportunity for everybody.
Thank you, Andy. It was a pleasure hosting and talking to you both, Andy and Chris. Thank you, and back to you, Sri.
Thank you, Dr. Koushik. Sudeendra, you did a great job. Managing 2 expert panelists is not easy, so you need a great moderator to be able to do that. So I do appreciate the presentations and also the conversation. I think the conversations are the most fun, where we talk out about what we really think instead of going through presentation materials. I think this was very interactive, some great questions from the audience. So I think we have come to the end of the session. This session is being recorded and we will share it. I want to once again thank IEEE TEMS and also NTT Data for being the support partner. I think we should grow this collaboration and do some very interesting things. I look forward to doing interesting things in 2021. But most importantly, all this is futile or not interesting if we don't have any audience on the questions. So I really want to take this opportunity to thank the audience for their patience, listening, questions, interaction. Look forward to seeing you all again in the next event with our partners again. Thank you very much.
Sri, before you go, can I request us going back to practice sessions? I just thought maybe it's a good idea we have a group here.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you.
No worries. So at this time, we will end the official session, and Munir will take us back to the practice session.
I actually have a hard stop. I have people waiting for me under the call, so I apologize for not being able to go back to a session. Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to take a picture of the group before we head off. So